Please don't introduce me as your husband tonight. That's what Janet said in the car. 5 minutes before we reached the venue she begged me to attend. She had a hand on her mirror, adjusting her lipstick, voice calm like she was asking me to pass her the napkin, not slice our marriage in half. I looked at her, not saying a word, and nodded once. That was all she needed. Inside the gala, cameras flashed like thunder. The announcer called her the youngest investigative journalist to receive this award. Applause filled the ballroom. I stayed seated when she walked onto the stage. She looked breathtaking, my wife, who hadn't looked me in the eyes for over 3 months. She adjusted the mic, smiled at the audience, and said, "I've learned that when you love something enough, you fight for it. I chose to fight for my career." The crowd roared in support, clueless about the silence burning between us. I smiled too, but it didn't reach my eyes. When she walked down, people clapped her on the back, praised her courage, her independence. A few looked at me awkwardly, unsure of my place. That made 2 of us. I stepped away without a word. On my way out, someone tapped my arm. Clara. She was there with a different firm, standing near the hallway like she had been watching everything. "Jimmy?" she asked. I gave her a nod, hollow and brief. She blinked. "You okay?" "Just tired of pretending I'm not being erased in slow motion," I said. She doesn't want a husband. She wants an accessory that keeps quiet when the cameras roll. Clara didn't pity me, that's why I kept standing there. "You going to keep waiting for her to remember you exist?" "No," I said. I just handed her freedom on a velvet plate. She'll never have to hide me in a crowd again. "Then what now?" she asked. I stopped cheering for someone who never clapped for me. I left before Janet noticed I was gone. Maybe she do. Maybe she didn't. She probably thought I'd be waiting by the car like always, holding her coat, telling her how proud I was. I didn't go home. I booked a different hotel, under a different name. I didn't want to be Jimmy, the husband who paused his own life just so hers could speed up. I turned my phone off at 2 a.m., but even silence wasn't enough to quiet my mind. The echo of her words repeated, "Don't introduce me as your husband," as if being my wife had become an inconvenience, as if I was a stumbling block between her and her applause. Janet once told me, if I stop working, I'll disappear. I didn't realize back then, she thought being my wife was the same as disappearing. The next morning, she posted a photo of the award. The caption read, "To everyone who supported me, thank you for believing in me when I chose the harder road." There was no mention of me, not in the post, not in the tags, not in her story, not in the thank you list she emailed to her fans. I scrolled through the comments. Thousands of people called her brave, strong, fearless. One even wrote, "She's proof you don't need a man to shine." I stared at the screen, my fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't comment. Instead, I texted her, "Don't come home, not because I hate you, but because I believe you. You said you needed space, I'm finally giving it to you." Then I turned off my phone again, and this time, I felt at peace. Jimmy had always been the kind of man who built quietly, no drama, no noise, no spotlight. He came from a family that didn't clap when you entered the room but expected you to hold the door open anyway. His father was a mechanic, his mother a school nurse, and both believed in honest work and silent strength. Jimmy carried that into everything he did. He didn't speak unless it mattered, and when he loved, he did it without needing to be seen. He met Janet at a networking event during their final year of university. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but she was magnetic. She asked questions with intent, listened like she was mining for truth. He saw the way her eyes lit up when someone mentioned journalism. She didn't want fame for the sake of it, she wanted power. Not to flaunt, but to expose, to dismantle injustice. She was ambitious in a way that didn't apologize, and that fascinated him. They weren't fast. Janet was cautious, guarded. Her career had always come first, even in college. She once told him during a coffee date, "I don't date for fun, I date to marry, but marriage slows people down. I won't let it slow me." Jimmy, ever the patient one, replied, "Then maybe you need someone who doesn't make you choose." That was the moment things shifted. From texts to phone calls, from phone calls to weekend visits, from visits to months of sharing spaces and silence, they moved into a rhythm that suited both. He handled the logistics, rent, groceries, bills, while she built her name. Her first article in the Chronicle went viral. Her name appeared on panels, student forums, even a local news segment. By graduation, Janet had 3 job offers from major newsrooms. Jimmy had an offer from a mid-sized tech firm. He accepted without fanfare and moved with her to the city that best matched her trajectory. He didn't mind. That was the thing about Jimmy, he was never in a race. He only wanted to make sure the people he loved had enough road beneath their feet. Their first year living together was uneven. Janet's schedule was brutal, early calls, late nights, chasing stories across the country. Jimmy adjusted. He handled errands, furniture deliveries, managed her mail, cooked when she forgot to eat, and never once complained when she came home too tired to talk. But love, real love, never needed to shout. It shows itself in the quiet mornings when someone remembers how you like your coffee. It hides in the way they keep your clothes ironed even when you're not speaking. Jimmy loved Janet with that kind of steady hand. And for a while, she let him. They married in a small ceremony at a coastal vineyard, just before her first international assignment. She wore a dress she picked last minute and gave her vows in under 2 minutes. But when he slipped the ring on her finger, she looked at him like he was the only still thing in her storm. For Jimmy, that look was enough. The years that followed were a blur of milestones, mostly hers. Her documentary on housing inequality won her a national award. Her exclusive with a political whistleblower trended for 3 days. She was invited to speak at conferences. Her Twitter following exploded. Publications called her the future of journalism, and through it all, Jimmy remained her home base. He packed her suitcases, updated her passport renewals, walked their dog, and sent her links to her own interviews with timestamps. Janet never asked him to step back, she just never asked him to step forward. She once told him, "You're too good at being invisible, it makes me forget to turn around." He laughed it off then, but the words stayed. Some nights, when she fell asleep on the couch after a long edit session, he would look at her and wonder if the person she became still had space for the person he was. Their marriage became functional, not affectionate, a partnership built on calendars, press junkets, and polite dinner conversations. Intimacy was replaced with productivity, passion with planning. They were teammates, but Jimmy didn't remember the last time he felt like her husband. The only time Janet showed emotion lately was when it came to work. If an article didn't hit numbers, she panicked. If an interview didn't go live in time, she broke things. If an editor offered mild criticism, she'd go silent for hours. Jimmy, meanwhile, carried those silences like heavy luggage, refusing to drop them even when they strained his arms. He tried to reach her once. On their 5th anniversary, he arranged a surprise dinner at the rooftop restaurant they used to walk past when they were broke students. He booked the same table they used to dream about. She didn't show. She was in Toronto, chasing a leak in Parliament. She forgot. And when she called the next morning, she didn't apologize, she thanked him for understanding. That was when Jimmy stopped scheduling anniversaries. Michael, Jimmy's old college roommate, noticed the change before Jimmy did. He called him out over a beer one night. "You still in love with her, or just in love with who she used to be?" Jimmy didn't answer, because the truth was, it didn't matter. Love wasn't something you just cancel when it gets inconvenient. He wasn't wired that way. And then came Clara. Clara was his co-worker in product development. She wasn't flashy, she wore jeans that frayed at the ankles, tied her hair back with the same pencil. She used to sketch UX flows, and always brought an extra coffee for whoever had the earliest shift. She didn't ask questions that stabbed, she just listened. One evening, during a product launch that ran 2 hours over, Clara caught him staring blankly at his phone. She asked, "You okay?" Jimmy shrugged. "Just watching someone forget I exist in real time." Clara didn't pry. She handed him a protein bar and said, "Eat, your blood sugar's dropping, I can tell." It wasn't love, not yet, but it was attention, and Jimmy hadn't felt that in months. The first time he mentioned Clara to Janet was during a dinner they didn't want to be at. Janet had just come back from a red-eye flight, exhausted, and Jimmy mentioned that Clara had covered for him during a deadline. Janet raised an eyebrow. "Clara, huh? Pretty name." "Smart too," Jimmy said without thinking. Janet didn't respond. He should have stopped then, but he didn't. Not because Clara offered romance, but because she reminded him what being seen felt like. Janet once told a magazine, "My husband is the most dependable man I know." That line went viral. People commented how lucky she was, how modern, how empowered. Jimmy read it in silence, sitting alone on the balcony of their home, while Janet took interviews in another city. He wasn't dependable, he was invisible, there's a difference. Still, he stayed, until the gala. Until the night she said, "Don't introduce me as your husband," until she chose her career again, and this time, he let her walk forward without waiting behind. Jimmy didn't leave Janet because he stopped loving her. He left because he finally realized he had been left years ago, and he was just now catching up to it. It began with a missed flight. Jimmy was supposed to land in DC in time for Janet's keynote panel on media ethics, a panel she had reminded him about every day for 2 weeks. He had confirmed his seat, even left work early, but a last-minute systems failure grounded all outgoing flights. He texted her as soon as he knew, followed up with a call, then another. She didn't answer. He watched the panel live online from the airport terminal, laptop balanced on his knees, carry-on under his feet. Janet was poised as ever, sharp-witted, eloquent, animated. She didn't mention him, not once. And when asked about support systems or partners, she simply said, "I've learned to rely on myself." That line stuck in his throat, not because it was cruel, because it was deliberate. When she finally called back, it was 1:42 a.m. "You missed it," she said flatly. "I watched it online," Jimmy replied, his voice low. "I'm proud of you, you were brilliant." "Don't patronize me," she snapped. "You said you'd be there, you always say that. It wasn't my fault. Isn't it always something?" That was the first time he raised his voice in months. "Janet, I sat at that airport for 8 hours, I haven't slept, I haven't eaten, and all I wanted was to make it to your event. Do you know what it feels like to watch the person you love tell the world she relies on no one?" She was silent for a beat, then said, "Maybe I don't want to feel indebted." "To who, me?" he asked. "We're married. Since when did showing gratitude become a debt?" "Since I became the only one carrying momentum," she said, each word sharper than the last. That night, something shifted, not in her, in him. Jimmy had always assumed love could wait. That if he gave her space, she would circle back. That if he was patient enough, loyal enough, silent enough, she'd realize he had been her foundation all along. But now he saw that space he gave her had turned into a chasm, one she had no intention of crossing again. A few weeks later, she extended her trip without telling him. He found out from a LinkedIn update. She posted a photo with a caption, "Honored to be invited to the World Forum on Media Transparency, extended my stay to collaborate with global minds." Her smile in the picture was dazzling. The arm on her shoulder, belonging to a senior editor named Michael, was not his. Jimmy didn't panic, he didn't accuse, he waited. When she returned 5 days later, she walked into their apartment like nothing had happened. "You're back," he said. "I told you I might stay longer." "No, you didn't." "I thought I did," she replied, already walking into the bedroom. "Don't be so sensitive." "Who's Michael?" he asked quietly. She paused, then laughed, like it was the dumbest question in the world. "You mean from the forum? He's just an editor, he was part of the panel team." "You two looked close. You looked desperate," she snapped. His jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady. "I'm asking because I'm your husband, not because I'm jealous. There's a difference." She turned to face him. "You're not jealous because you don't care. You just want to prove you've done your part. Like checking a box." Husband asked a question. Jimmy stared at her. "Is that how little you think of me?" "I think we both settled," she said. "I settled for a man who doesn't challenge me. You settled for a woman you thought would eventually slow down." It wasn't betrayal that shattered him in that moment, it was recognition. She meant it, she had crafted an entire narrative in which they were both passengers, not partners. He left the apartment that night and stayed at a hotel. Clara messaged him after noticing he hadn't logged in for their project updates. "You good?" she wrote. "Trying to remember what it feels like to be nented," he replied. The next day, Clara brought coffee and an extra sweatshirt to the office. "You left this in the break room last week," she said. "Smells like peppermint." Jimmy smiled faintly. "Probably from when I used to work nights. Janet loved those mints." Clara didn't ask questions, she just sat beside him during lunch and talked about things that didn't make him feel small. When Jimmy returned home a few days later, Janet wasn't there. Her side of the closet was half empty. A note sat on the kitchen counter. "I need time to think. Please don't follow me. Janet." He stood in that quiet apartment for a long time, staring at the absence she left behind. No forwarding address, no explanation, just a directive: don't follow. He didn't, but the questions followed him. Was Michael more than a colleague? Did she already choose her exit before the gala? Had their marriage been over longer than he realized? When he finally heard from her again, it was an email. Subject: Tax documents. Jimmy, I've had my assistant send over the files you needed. Also, I'll be staying in New York for the next few months. I've accepted a fellowship with the International Journalism Institute. I hope you understand this is something I need to do for myself. J. He didn't reply. There was nothing left to defend. Clara noticed the change in him. His shoulders stayed straighter. His silences became less heavy. He was working out again, eating lunch at a normal hour, making jokes during team meetings. She didn't comment, she just stayed close. One night after a company dinner, they walked home together. She asked, "Are you filing?" Jimmy nodded. Janet's made it clear where her priorities lie. It would be cruel to pretend I'm still waiting for her to choose me. Clara hesitated, then said, "You know, people like her think they're choosing a bigger life, but what they don't realize is, in building alone, they forget what it feels like to come home." Jimmy turned to look at her. "And people like you? We build with someone," she said, "not behind, not ahead. Just with." For the first time in months, Jimmy exhaled without feeling like something inside him cracked. But the storm wasn't done. 2 weeks later, a friend forwarded him an article. The title read, "Award-winning journalist Janet Carr opens up about the struggles of loving a man who wasn't built for the spotlight." His name wasn't used, but the details were unmistakable. Jimmy read the piece 3 times. Every line painted him as the man who faded in the face of ambition, the man who couldn't handle a woman who shone brighter, the man who tried to dim her light out of fear. He didn't call her, he didn't send a cease and desist, he simply clicked share and wrote one sentence. "I didn't ask you to dim your light, I just hoped you'd remember who held the torch while you found it." The post exploded. People debated, chose sides, psychoanalyzed, but Clara, she came to his office and handed him her phone. "Read this." It was a letter to the editor, Clara's name at the top. She hadn't told him she'd written it. "Some women rise because they're brilliant. Some rise because someone held the ground beneath them steady. Both deserve respect. But let's not pretend one is nobler than the other." He looked at her, stunned. "I didn't write it for applause," she said. "I wrote it because truth matters. You mattered, and people should know." Jimmy felt something then, rage, yes, but also closure. Janet's betrayal wasn't infidelity, it was the rewriting of history, a quiet erasure of everything he gave, dressed up as a success story, and he wasn't going to let her sign his name at the bottom of a lie. Jimmy stared at the screen long after the article had stopped trending. Comments still poured in, dissecting his silence, twisting it into guilt. Some praised Janet's vulnerability, calling her brave for speaking her truth. Others accused her of rewriting the past to clean up her future. Jimmy didn't engage with either side. Because in his world, the loudest voice didn't always tell the truth. It just filled the silence fast enough to make people forget there was another version at all. At night, he found himself wide awake, not because he was angry, but because he was numb. There's a particular kind of emptiness that follows after you've given someone everything, only to watch them turn it into a monologue without your name in the credits. That was what Janet had done. She had taken their story, one he built brick by brick with sacrifices and silence, and rewritten it as a cautionary tale about loving the wrong man. He didn't cry, not because he didn't want to, but because the grief had calcified. His pain had matured into something quiet, something dense. It sat in his chest like a rock he couldn't swallow, couldn't move, couldn't name. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes. At the coffee shop, 2 strangers whispered while looking at their phones. At work, a junior developer accidentally called him the guy from the article before turning red with embarrassment. At a friend's birthday dinner, someone asked him outright, "Was it really that bad between you two?" He didn't answer. How do you explain to people that emotional abandonment doesn't always come with screaming, or cheating, or bruises? Sometimes it comes with silence. with being left out of decisions, with being uninvited from someone's future. He had asked her once, months before the gala, "Do you still see me in your 10-year plan?" Janet had blinked. "Do I need to make a 10-year plan about you?" He hadn't asked Ed again. Now, in the aftermath, Jimmy found himself reliving every ignored message, every postponed anniversary, every empty seat at a dinner table for two. He remembered the way Janet used to cancel their Sunday walks for last-minute meetings, the way she stopped asking him about his projects, the way she started referring to the apartment as her place, even though his name was the only one on the mortgage. He remembered the night he waited outside her studio, with takeout and flowers. She was 2 hours late. When she finally showed up, she said, "You should have just gone home." And he had. That night, and every night after, he started arriving less. Not physically, but emotionally. Clara noticed it before he did. She didn't say it out loud, but he could tell. She spoke to him with gentleness, like someone who understood what it meant to carry invisible wounds. He once asked her, "Do I come off bitter?" She replied, "No, you come off unfinished." It haunted him, not because she was wrong, but because she was the first person who didn't mistake his stillness for peace. The hardest part wasn't that Janet left, it was realizing she had already been gone for years, that he had been having conversations with someone who wasn't really listening, that she had kissed him absent-mindedly, answered his texts like chores, thanked him like an assistant, and built a career with him as the temporary scaffolding she always meant to remove. Some nights, he would reread old messages, trying to pinpoint the moment she began to emotionally disappear. There was no clear line, just a slow erosion, like watching a shoreline sink beneath waves and not realizing the water was rising until your feet were soaked. The suspense wasn't about whether she would come back. The real suspense was internal, whether he'd ever believe in commitment again, whether he'd ever trust someone enough to build beside them, not for them, whether he could ever love without wondering when he'd be turned into a footnote again. Clara didn't rush him. She brought him peace in the form of stability, scheduling walks, organizing team lunches, checking in on him without making it feel like surveillance. She didn't ask about Janet, she just made space for his silence, and slowly, Jimmy began to breathe differently around her. But he didn't call it healing. He called it repair. He began showing up for himself, eating better, going for runs, sleeping before 2 a.m. He even started writing again, something he had stopped years ago, not for publication, but for clarity. His journal filled with questions he didn't expect answers for. When did I stop being seen? Why did I wait so long to speak up? Who am I now that I'm not her husband? He didn't hate Janet. That was the cruelest part. Hatred would have made it easier to move on, but what he felt was more complex, a grief for the version of her he once loved, and a strange sympathy for the woman she had become. Someone so afraid of dependency, she destroyed the only relationship that didn't demand sacrifice for survival. Jimmy saw it clearly now. Janet didn't want a partner, she wanted an audience. And he had clapped long enough. The worst pain came the night he received a box at his door. No return label. Inside, a photo album from their wedding. Pages untouched. A note tucked behind the final picture. "Yo. You were always too good to me, that was the problem, I never had to fight for you. Jay." He closed the book, set it aside, and didn't write back. That night, Clara knocked on his door with Thai food and 2 movie tickets she knew they wouldn't use. "You look like you need a bad comedy," she said, holding the bag up like a peace treaty. He smiled. "I need something that doesn't remind me of her." She nodded. "Then it's good I came, I remind you of you." That was the moment something softened, not completely, but enough. He sat beside her on the couch, and for the first time in months, he didn't feel like he was walking around in a body that didn't belong to him. It wasn't love yet, but it was something quieter, something steadier, something that didn't need to be louder than Janet's legacy, just strong enough to outlive it. 2 months after Janet's op-ed vanished from headlines, and 3 weeks after Jimmy had finally boxed up the last of her things, a call came in that he never expected. It was Michael. The same Michael who had appeared in Janet's photos, who had his hand on her shoulder, who'd been part of that glossy New York crowd she adored. The same man Jimmy suspected, quietly, painfully, had replaced him before the vows were even cold. "Jimmy," the voice said, casual like they were old friends. "Do you have a minute?" Jimmy leaned against his desk, confused. "Not really. Who is this?" "Michael. I figured it was time you and I talked, man to man." He almost hung up right there. But curiosity and anger, dangerous allies, held his hand. Michael continued. Look, this isn't about the article, or the past. I just thought you deserved to know, Janet's back in town. Jimmy didn't respond. She's not staying long. There's a summit here this week and she's one of the keynotes, but I thought, you should know what's coming. What's coming? Jimmy asked, voice low. A pause, then, she submitted another piece, a personal essay, and you're in it, heavily. Jimmy stood still, the air around him stiffening. Michael added, the draft I saw, it paints you as emotionally manipulative, distant, controlling. He blinked. That's not true. I know, that's why I'm calling you. Jimmy sat down slowly, the pressure in his chest mounting. Why would you call me? Aren't you the one she… Michael interrupted. She used me, the way she uses everyone. You weren't paranoid, you were polite. Jimmy was stunned into silence. I don't want to be a part of whatever war she's staging next, Michael said. But she's planning to frame this version of events like gospel. Thought you deserved a heads up. Jimmy ended the call without another word. He sat in his office for hours, staring at nothing. That tight, hot breeze, sure behind his eyes, he hadn't felt it in weeks, maybe months, and now, just as he was breathing again, she was rewriting the script all over again. This time, with a new twist, Jimmy not as the invisible man, but the villain. That night, he didn't go home. He drove, past their old apartment, past the bookstore where they had picked out their first coffee table, past the restaurant where she once turned down a proposal on the first attempt, saying, it's not the right moment, while everyone clapped around them. When he finally returned to his apartment, Clara was there, curled up on the couch with a blanket, typing on her laptop. She looked up and smiled, but it faded as soon as she saw his face. What happened? He handed her his phone with Michael's number still visible on the screen. She read the call history, confused, then listened without interrupting as he explained everything, Michael's warning, the new article, the lies being prepared. I can't let her publish that, Jimmy said. It's character assassination. She knows what she's doing, Clara murmured. She needs a villain to sell herself as the hero again. He rubbed his temples. What do I do? Write a response? Sue? No, she said softly. You hold the truth. That's enough. People will know. People already see through it. I don't care about people, he snapped, more sharply than he meant to. I care about having the last part of me she didn't break, my reputation, shredded for sympathy, clicks. Clara went quiet. Then she stood, walked into the kitchen, poured water, and came back. When she handed him the glass, she said, so fight, but fight smart, not loud. Jimmy stared at her. Expose the truth if you need to. Show who you are now, not who she says you were. The next morning, Jimmy requested a meeting with his media team. He had never used his public platform for anything personal, but now he was ready to make one exception. He didn't want to attack Janet, he wanted to protect the truth, so he began drafting a letter, not defensive, not accusatory, just his side, his voice. 3 days later, before he could finish the statement, Clara knocked on his door holding a folder. Read this. Inside were screenshots, emails, messages, from Janet, to Michael, to a ghost account she had used during the height of her public scandal. Inside was the outline of her essay, the one she hadn't published yet, but intended to. Her source was clear, her angle sharper than a knife. Clara had gotten it from someone who used to work with Janet, someone fed up with her manipulation, someone tired of watching her build empires from other people's ruins. Jimmy sat there, stunned. Why would they give you this? Because they believe in you more than they believe in her anymore. He closed the folder. Every line he read confirmed it. Janet wasn't just rewriting the past, she was rewriting Jimmy's character into something cold, controlling, and calculated. She was building her next story not from journalism, but from justified fiction. That night, Jimmy didn't sleep. He walked into his office at dawn and typed something he hadn't said aloud in years. My silence was never a weakness, it was restraint. He posted a short video, no background music, no edits, just his voice. He didn't name Janet, he didn't even mention the article, but he said, I was married to someone whose success I believed in more than my own. I supported her not for praise, but because I thought that's what love did. But I learned too late that when someone builds alone, they write the story alone, and sometimes they write you out of it altogether. By noon, the video had over 3 million views. The world had heard his voice. Not loud, but clear, and this time, no one was going to erase it. Jimmy had never intended to go to the summit. He knew Janet would be there, headlining the final session, signing books, smiling into every flash that offered a way to forget her past. It was the biggest event of her year, a celebration of journalism and its power to shape narratives. And no one understood the irony better than the man who was once her footnote. But on the morning of the summit, after days of silence following his video, Jimmy received a call that changed everything. It was the organizer. "We'd like you to join the media integrity panel this afternoon," the woman said politely. "Your recent post sparked a global conversation. We think your perspective is necessary." Jimmy was stunned. "You want me on a panel? At her summit?" "There will be no direct debate. The schedule is designed so your appearance won't overlap with hers, but your voice, people want to hear it, it matters." Jimmy hesitated. He hadn't stepped into a public room with Janet since the gala, but this wasn't about her. This was about reclaiming space she'd swallowed with headlines, with veiled op-eds, with the kind of charisma that made everyone believe her version first. So he said yes. The venue buzzed when he entered. People whispered, cameras tilted, a few reporters approached, but his team held them off. Clara was at his side, calm as always, not needing to speak, her presence a silent kind of armor. The panel began. The host introduced Jimmy not as a victim, not as a scorned man, but as a builder, a founder, a leader, a voice for restraint in an age of performative war. And then the question came. "Mr. Harper," the host said, voice even, "in your viral message, you spoke of being written out of your own story. Can you speak to what it feels like when truth becomes negotiable?" Jimmy leaned forward, mic steady in his hand. "It feels like silence being weaponized," he said. Litoy. Key support being reframed as control. When someone chooses to speak first, they often shape how the world sees everyone else involved, but being first doesn't always mean being right. There was a murmur of agreement in the crowd. He continued, "I'm not here to debate anyone. I'm not here to point fingers. I just want to say, some of us loved quietly, and that doesn't mean we were absent. It just means we weren't trying to be the loudest voice in the room." Applause. Not thunderous, but real. When the panel ended, Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it." He nodded. Almost. Because the real moment hadn't come yet. That night, at the summit's closing gala, Jimmy stayed longer than planned. He hadn't seen Janet, and part of him hoped she had already left, but hope, like memory, is rarely on time. He saw her across the ballroom. She wore white, a sharp suit with gold detailing. Not bridal, but bold. Her hair was tucked behind her ears, revealing diamond studs he had bought her on their 3rd anniversary. She hadn't returned them. Janet's eyes met his. She hesitated, then walked toward him. Jimmy didn't move. Clara, sensing the shift in air, stepped back and gave them space. Not because she had to, because she trusted him to know the difference between closure and invitation. Janet stopped a foot away. "I thought you wouldn't show." "I wasn't going to," he replied. Her smile was brittle. "You made quite the impression today." "You've made plenty," he said. "Figured it was my turn." She studied him. "Do you hate me?" He didn't answer immediately. "I don't feel enough to hate you. That's the problem, isn't it? You need emotion, drama, fire. I gave you steadiness, so you rewrote me as cold." Janet swallowed. "That wasn't fair." "No, it wasn't," he said. "But it was strategic." She flinched. "I didn't mean for the article to cause damage. You just meant for it to win attention." Janet looked down, then back up. "You weren't perfect, Jimmy. I never claimed to be, but I was present, even when you disappeared, even when I was only allowed to exist behind your camera angles." She exhaled shakily. "I thought I had to keep running, that if I stopped to look back, I'd fall." "You didn't fall," Jimmy said. "You pushed." There was silence. She tried again. "Why didn't you ever fight back?" "Because I thought love was supposed to be safe, not a battlefield. I didn't want to fight the person I came home to." Janet's voice dropped. "And Clara?" "She listens," Jimmy said. "She doesn't need to be the headline." Janet's shoulders sagged. "Do you love her?" "I could," he said honestly. "And this time, I won't love from the shadows." She blinked fast, like she didn't want to cry. Jimmy leaned in slightly, not to touch her, but to say something just for her. You chose your career over our marriage, and you were right to, but don't punish me because I finally chose myself. He turned away, but she grabbed his hand. Jimmy, she whispered, and this time her voice trembled. I think I ruined everything. He looked at her, really looked, the face he had memorized, the voice that used to calm him, the ambition that once inspired him, now wrapped in a woman who didn't know what to do when applause faded. You didn't ruin everything, he said, just us. She let go, and Jimmy walked away. Clara stood by the exit, hands folded, eyes gentle. He walked up to her and said, "Let's go." She nodded, falling into step beside him. As they stepped into the quiet night, Clara said, "That looked like closure." It was. Did it hurt? Yes, Jimmy said. But only because I needed it. They didn't talk much on the way home. But when she reached for his hand at the intersection, he didn't pull away. And that, after everything, was the first moment that truly belonged to him. 6 months after the summit, Jimmy stood on the balcony of a penthouse that wasn't his, yet. The city lights below blinked like they were signaling him forward, urging him to stop hesitating and take what he'd earned. The apartment wasn't for luxury, it was for vision, for rebuilding, for finally stepping out from the background Janet had once pushed him into. Behind him, Clara moved quietly through the space, reviewing sketches on a digital tablet. Their startup had just closed its Series B funding round. The board was expanding, and for the first time in his life, Jimmy wasn't just the builder behind the scenes, he was the face of it. "You're thinking again," Clara said gently, not looking up. "I always think when I feel like I finally stopped waiting for something." She set the tablet down and joined him on the balcony. "You're not waiting anymore, you're building. For yourself." He nodded, but the weight in his chest hadn't fully lifted. "What if she writes another one?" he asked. "She won't," Clara said confidently. "Your truth already filled the silence, the world heard it. But she always finds a way to rewrite history." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then we write the future louder." That night, Jimmy received a private message. A verified journalist had forwarded a leaked draft, Janet's memoir proposal. It was being shopped to major publishers. The summary was damning. The protagonist was her. The antagonist was clear, the man who kept her emotionally chained while pretending to set her free. Jimmy stared at the screen, rage swirling with exhaustion. He didn't need this battle, he had outgrown it. But she hadn't, and that was the difference. Instead of replying, he called his attorney, then his PR advisor. He wasn't interested in court, he was interested in precision. 3 weeks later, Jimmy announced a book of his own, not a response, but a PE's perspective, not about Janet, but about power, silence, and what it meant to be a man in someone else's spotlight. The working title said it all. The man behind the curtain, building while she took the bow. It wasn't petty, it was strategic. He didn't use her name once, but every page cut with clarity. He wrote about how invisibility is romanticized, how society celebrates women who walk away, but ridicules men who stay too long. He wrote about dignity, about loyalty, about the quiet cost of love when you're always expected to give and never to be seen. The book hit pre-order records before the cover design was even finalized. Janet responded. Of course she did. She posted a cryptic message on her social feed. "Some people build platforms by standing on your name. Let them, that just means you're higher." Clara raised an eyebrow when she saw it. "She's projecting again." Jimmy smirked. "Let her." What Janet didn't know, what no one but Jimmy and his core team knew, was that Clara had reached out to her publisher weeks ago. Quietly, professionally, not to block Janet's deal, but to offer the truth Janet had so skillfully bent. A full document. Dates, timestamps, screenshots, signed emails. Proof that during Janet's rise, Jimmy had funded her early career expenses, that she'd lived rent-free while he worked 16-hour shifts, that her independence was paved with his sacrifices. He hadn't publicized it because he never needed to, but now, it was insurance, and Clara, his co-founder, his partner, his calm in the storm, had delivered it precisely where it mattered. Her message to the publisher was short, no legal threats, no press statements, just consider this before deciding which version of the truth you want to endorse. Janet's memoir was quietly dropped. No announcement, no controversy, Just gone. One by one, her brand sponsors began pulling their collaborations, not because Jimmy told them to, but because integrity matters when you build your legacy on truth. And Janet had turned hers into a performance. Jimmy didn't celebrate, he didn't post, he didn't dance on her downfall. He simply moved forward. The next few months were quiet, productive. Clara and Jimmy launched a new mentorship initiative, spotlighting creators and founders who had been invisible behind others' success. The campaign trended for weeks. Investors praised the vision. The press called them the quiet revolutionaries. And then came the wedding invitation. Not theirs, Janet's. She was marrying a European photojournalist, a man she had met on an assignment in Istanbul. The announcement was a glossy spread in a luxury lifestyle magazine. The headline, "After the Storm, How Janet Carr Finally Found Her Equal." Clara tossed the magazine on the table with a laugh. Equal, huh? Jimmy flipped through it silently. Janet looked serene, but not real. She's still performing, he murmured. Always. The article made no mention of Jimmy, not even a whisper. He folded the magazine and tossed it in the trash. She found someone who'll chase the spotlight with her. That's what she always wanted, not a mirror, a megaphone. Do you regret it? Clara asked softly. He thought for a moment. No, he said. I regret how long it took me to stop waiting. That night, they finalized the design for their next office, open space, no hierarchy, no titles on doors, everyone equal, everyone seen. Before locking up, Clara handed him an envelope. This came in today. Inside was a check. Royalties from his book's first quarter. The amount was staggering. He stared at it. Clara grinned. Told you silence pays, if you know how to break it. He looked at her. The woman who had never asked him to shrink, who had never needed him to vanish so she could shine, who had stood beside him, not behind him. I think I'm ready, he said suddenly. For what? For the next chapter. She raised an eyebrow. Of what? Of us, he said. Whatever that looks like, not out of survival, not out of comparison, just clarity. Clara didn't blush, she didn't giggle, she just nodded once. Then let's write it together. In the months that followed, Jimmy received another message from Janet. No subject line, no greeting, just, you finally learned how to speak. I underestimated you. He didn't reply. Because silence wasn't his weakness anymore. It was his choice.